Good evening and welcome to the third episode of Unmute, the interview series conceptualized by IFEST, All India Forum for English Students, Scholars, and Trainers, with one aim to unravel the art in heart and heart in art. So I welcome you all. And today, I'm happy to share that we have with us poet Fióna Bolger from Ireland. Hello, Fiona.
Hi, Shatarupa. Lovely to be here with you. Thank you so
Yes,
much for the
so
honor.
great to see you. And we are ready to begin this journey that we are about to undertake. But before that, I just want to tell you why we thought of naming this interview series Unmute. I would like to begin with a quote from N. Carson, and this is from her work titled Knox, which is actually an epitaph written after the death of her brother. And the words go like this. Note that the word mute is regarded by linguists as an onomatopic formation referring not to silence, but to a certain fundamental opacity of human being, which likes to show the truth by allowing to be seen hiding. So, if mute refers to that deliberate opacity, then unmute for us means playing along, not trying to make anything transparent, trusting the path, understanding that which is hiding, and becoming one with it, leading others to the hiding place so that they may have their own relationships with that which is ever elusive. So, with that, we will begin our conversation. And it is my duty to introduce you to our audience. I'm sure they would love to know everything about you, everything that you have done. So, Fióna Bolger is a poet, creative writing teacher, and workshop facilitator based in Dublin. She has an MA in creative writing from Lancaster University. Her latest publication is the volume of poetry titled A Compound of Words, which is published by Yoda Press in 2019. She has co-edited All the Worlds Between, a collaborative poetry project between Ireland and India, which is also published by Yoda Press 2017. The Geometry of Love Between the Elements is another illustrated poetry collection of hers published by Poetry Bus Press, Arklow 2013. And I'm happy to share with you that her next work is soon to be published by Salmon Press. Her poems have been published in Chattahoochee Review, The Brown Critique, Southward, Poetry Buzz, News India, and many other journals. She has performed at Lingo Festival Dublin, Bengaluru Poetry Festival, O'Weill's Women the World Over 1916, and Cork Spring Poetry Festival. So Fiona is also a performer. She is a coordinator of Dublin Writers Forum and a member of the creative team of Outlandish Theatre Platform Ireland. Fiona has facilitated several workshops, and I have attended 4 of them and found them enriching and collaborative. All the words in the world, even more words in the world, sticking out your tongue and thinking with nature. And let me tell you, friends, in these workshops, we read and discussed the works of poets like Edwin Morgan, Kaveh Akbar, M. Norvis, Philip, Vani Kapildev, Divya Victor, and many others. So I'm really happy and thankful to Fiona that she agreed to do this interview. And I welcome you once again, Fiona. And at this point, if you'd like to say something to our audience, then please go ahead.
Thank you so much. And I'm really honored to be here today. Shatarupa and I have built up our relationship through Zoom. We're COVID friends in a way, and it's been just so lovely getting to know you, Shatarupa, and hearing your insightful comments on poetry. So when you invited me to this iFest interview, I was so excited and truly honored because I regard you as a really diligent and careful and attentive reader of poetry, and someone who very little escapes your beady eyes and your alertness. Your heart is open, your eyes are open, and you see. Blessed are your students, you know. So to all of you who are here today, I'm so happy to be in the hands of Shatarupa, and I think I'm going to learn so much from Shatarupa's questions. And I hope that you'll enjoy our conversation today. And if you are a writer, if you are a poet, just, we'll be talking at the end about it. But, you know, I think everyone's a writer, everyone's a poet. So just keep writing and keep reading. And looking forward to the interview today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fiona, for such wonderful words. So let us go ahead and talk about your collection, A Compound of Words. Before we go to the collection, however, I would like to begin with a little poem by 5-year-old Louise Gluck. Actually, I was reading her interview and an essay which she wrote on poetry, and I found it really interesting when she wanted to tell or explain why she had this desire to write poetry after all. And I will just quote her. She says, I wanted to make something. I wanted to finish my own sentences. And I was sufficiently addicted to my mother's approval to want to shine at something she held in high esteem. So that was so sweet of her. And I would like to read out the little poem that she wrote as a 5-year-old. If kitty cats liked roast beef bones and doggies sipped up milk, if elephants walked around the town all dressed in purest silk, if robins went out coasting, they slid down crying wee. If all this happened to be true, then where would people be? Such a beautiful fantasy clothed in words of innocence, I would say. And that is where I asked you my first question, Fiona. How did it all begin for you? What were your first feelings that impelled you to write poetry, to put words on page?
Really interesting, and it's really interesting that Louise Gluck wrote looking for her mother's approval. I grew up in a house where the rule was say nothing to no one about anything. And Irish people will recognize that. It's kind of like a cliche, you know, you don't tell anybody anything, and you make sure, you know, you don't even tell yourself a lot of things. So in fact, I have one poem and it's called Be Careful What You Write. Or be careful what you say, I can't remember, but one or the other. So that writing was actually kind of breaking rules, putting things down on paper and being honest on paper was actually a very dangerous, it was always regarded as a dangerous thing to do. Words were seen as dangerous. I remember the first time I used a swear word, I was probably about 5, and I got into big trouble. And I will never, I think that was the beginning of my realizing that words have huge power, you know, they can actually, saying this one word could actually bring this, you know, catastrophe on yourself. So, but poetry, I grew up with a grandfather who was an engineer and never read a novel in his life, but he read poetry. He could quote Chaucer, he could quote Oliver Goldsmith, he could quote Seamus Heaney was one of his favorite poets. And so he would constantly kind of spew out poetry at me. And so, you know, lines of poetry would come here and would come there. And I lived with him most weekends from when I was about 13. I was in boarding school and I would go to his house on the weekends. And even when I was younger, I would spend time in his house. So my early memories of poetry would be him kind of reeling off lines, and not with any particular meaning, but he would just say them. And I go, oh, that's really interesting. And he also had a house full of books. And I remember rummaging through the books and finding poetry books. So I would have found A.A. Milne when we were very young, but there was another book called The Breakfast Club. And I have there was a poem in the book called The Boating Breakfast or something. The book itself was green and small. I have no idea who wrote it, but it was this poem about this bunch of people who went boating on some canal, and then something happened and they all ended up in the water. And I just loved this poem, and I read it over and over and over, and it's gone. I have no idea who wrote it, what it was called, or anything about it. It's gone. And the other person in my life who did a lot of poetry was my Auntie Maureen, and she would have been my mother's mother's sister. So she was called Auntie Maureen, which was really Grand Auntie Maureen, and she would recite poems. So I would sit on her knee, and she had big gold hoop earrings, and she had kind of curly hair, and she would sit there and she would perform poems for me. And I still remember bits of those poems, but she had one long poem, which I wrote down carefully when I was a little bit older, and the notebook got lost. And again, I have fragments of these poems. And so maybe in a way, my own making of poetry is a search to kind of find the fragments or something. But definitely I learned from them that poetry is something that you have inside you, that you pick up here and you pick up there, and it's inside you, and then it comes out, and that it can really reach other people, and it stays with people. It catches between your teeth in a way other kinds of language use go in one ear and out the other. But poetry, for some reason, the structures, the concentration of it, the way in which it's distilled language that's really been thought about, makes it kind of stick on, I think. And my grandfather, when he died, my aunt was going through his possessions, and she found a poem I had written for him for his birthday, and it was called To Granda. I have no idea where it is now. And he had kept it all those years. I must have written it when I was about 7 or 8, and I was about 18 when he died. So he'd had that piece of paper in his book all of those years, and I got it back then later. And it was funny because, and I didn't really consider myself a poet or a writer of poetry until I was well into about 35. So I'm now 50. So
such lovely memories indeed. And what you said was important, that just feeling these fragments was some kind of beginning, because you don't have everything with you forever, but these fragments which actually touch you at some point or other of time, they remain in you, within you, and you don't have to have them physically in order to access them. You kind of you can find them anytime you want, because that is the kind of bonding you have with those early memories. And that was really nice, knowing about where it all began. So thank you for that. And I'm sure by now our viewers must be thinking of, for them how it all began, and they would be now thinking of their fond memories of their relationships with poetry. So that was beautiful. And now I would, just talk about some poets who you were deeply inspired by. Because if anyone asks me that question, my mind always goes to Pied Beauty by Gerard Manley Hopkins. And somehow that line, glory be to God for dappled things, it has with me and it never leaves me. And uh, you know whatever is pickled, freckled, these are the lines that have stayed with me. And immediately when somebody asks me, that is the first poem and that is the first poet who comes to my mind. So I'm really curious to know about those poets who have, left a deep impression on you, and would also like to know what in their work struck a chord.
Well, first of all, just to respond to your Gerard Manley Hopkins, when you come to visit me in Dublin, Shatarupa, we shall go to Trinity because he was in Trinity, and then he's buried out in Glasnevin Cemetery. And I know this because a professor from the US, Angeli, her surname has gone out of my head, but Angeli's amazing, and she's a wonderful poetry reader as well, and a great scholar of Colatker, Angeli Nerlarker, and she's a great fan of Gerard Manley Hopkins. And when she was in Dublin, she wanted to go and see his grave. So for the first time ever, I went to his grave. So I now know where his grave is. So when you come to Dublin, we shall go and praise it.
Amazing. Thank you for that.
We'll do that. For me, I am much more fickle. I am so fickle. So these bits of things stuck in my head, and I suppose I have, Emily Dickinson stuck in my head. When I was growing up, the curriculum in Ireland for poetry was rather restricted, and we had mainly white male poets, all white poets, mainly male, and we had one female poet on our Leaving Cert course, which is the 12th exam. And the one female poet was Emily Dickinson. And, all the poems were about death and, souls and stuff. And, when you're a teenager, really. But as a woman, as a girl, I think I realized very early that I couldn't be a poet because you had to be a white man, preferably a dead white man. But you definitely, unless you were this one exception, Emily Dickinson, who locked herself in a room all your life, you couldn't possibly be a female poet. So I suppose I'll put that away, and I'll say the poets that I kind of are in my heart now, and who are kind of I'm in conversation with now, and whose work kind of I can't get enough of it. And of course, in 6 months' time, you'll ask me and I'll have forgotten the names of these poets and I'll be on to some other, I'm so fickle like that. It's like every day there's something new to discover. There's someone new to discover. And I suppose bits and pieces stick with me and then I keep moving on. So I suppose Colatker would be a huge, I'm a great fan of Colatker's work. And the funny thing is, when I lived in Allahabad years ago, back when I was in my 20s, so the late 19, the mid 90s, yes, this is the one I have. But back in the 1990s, I had gone into Wheeler's bookshop in Allahabad. For anybody who knows Wheeler's bookshop, I hope it's still there. And I went in and I was flicking through the books and I found Jejuri. And it was probably I still have it, and I think it's the original first edition Jejuri, which was subsequently republished by the New York Times or the New Yorker or whatever, but New York Review of Books. So that I had, and that was very powerful for me. And then it was in my book collection. I kind of forgot about Colatker until my fellow student who had come to Dublin from Delhi, Tapasya Narang, Dr. Tapasya Narang now, she started talking to me about Colatker. And I went, that name is familiar. And I found that I had this Blood Axe collected works. She borrowed it because her Colatker books were still in India. Then hers came and she handed it back to me. I was like, what is this thing about Colatker? I went, oh my God, I've read this man before. Oh my God, these poems. And I was reading a poet who was looking at India, and I'd already written a compound of words at that point, but he was looking at things and I was going, oh, yes, this resonates, this makes sense. And, who else could write a poem about rubbish, recycling itself and kind of giving birth to new rubbish, and that gentle humor, and yet that love. And he writes with so much love about people that other people ignore, about dogs, about older people, about people who are begging, his sense of the humanity of all, and a great love. Really, really, so Colatker is somebody that I would kind of go, oh, I wish I'd written that poem. Really beautiful, amazing work, and I think well worth spending time with. And I suppose the other person whose work I'm really interested in at the moment would be Divya Victor. She's also a mentor, but she became a mentor because I fell in love with her poetry. And again, I do Zoom sessions with a friend who was living in Dublin, who's now back in Berlin, Ozgajan Kasici, and she sent me a copy of Divya Victor's book. Not her first one now, of course the name's gone out of my head, but her second one, Curb, is with me now. But I opened it up and I just fell in love with it. Kith, it's called Kith. And she uses Tamil, she uses Malayalam. She's very much rooted in her living in the US, but there's very much a sense of India and, you know, her hometown, Kanyakumari. All of that is there, and this experience of migration and the way in which people are treated in different places. But again, that sense of the humanity of all and the value in all ways of living and in all beings. And her work, it really challenges the idea of lyric poetry. She breaks that apart, making lists of things, and using newspaper articles. One of her pieces is taking an application form for American citizenship and breaking that down, taking the oath to be an American citizen. Again, taking that down and using it to make poetry. I suppose Norbase Phillips' Zong does something similar, taking an official document and almost putting it in your mouth, chewing it up, and then spitting it out as poetry. And I find that really powerful. I'm really interested in that. So Divya, Norbase Phillips, and then I suppose the other person would be David Morley. So what happened was I started writing poetry, and this poetry I was writing was all a muddle of languages. There was Hindi in there was Tamil in there was Malayalam in there. I mean, what was I doing? And everybody in Ireland was looking at me going, what are you doing? I mean, Irish poets don't put Irish words even into their poetry. So what was I doing mixing all these words from somewhere else, and what was going on? And David Morley's work did that. He was using Romany words, and I found David Morley was doing things that I had found myself doing. And so I was comforted. And then I met David Morley. I went to a workshop, and he was so encouraging. And so, yeah, keep doing that. Yeah, this is working. This is poetry. And that was so affirming. So I suppose they will be the three people, when you ask me straight off, they're the three people who pop into my mind. But yeah.
And yes, I can understand why you took those names, because in your work, Fiona, you have actually explored the underbelly of India, and you have talked of child labor. You have, touched upon, militancy, and you have touched upon civil wars for minerals. You have touched upon turning living spaces into military camps where anything could happen. So I would say I can understand why you took the names that you did. Also because you have experimented a lot so far as form is concerned, and your sentences, they run into each other, and there is also that aspect of putting words from different languages together, whether it is Malayalam, whether it is Tamil, whether it is Kannada, or some Arabic words also, and Sanskrit words are there. So all of these words you have together, and there is a blend. So yes, I can understand why you were influenced by these writers, and I can see that influence working in your writing as well. So thank you for that, Fiona. And in the meantime, your dog has come into our conversation. So if she would like to say hi to our viewers, she can do this. Hello.
Her name in Ireland is Cindy, but when I want to give her Tamil name, she's Chinduma.
Yeah, interesting. So yes, let's go on with our talk. And now I would like you to show your book to the audience. Yes, they have already. They know about it, but now we are going to talk about your cover, and that's why I wanted you to show them the cover page. So we have a busy two-lane road, we have auto rickshaws, we have scooters, we have bicycles, and in the middle of that we have a profusion of colors, those colorful balloons, so many of them, and somehow they are making a statement, telling a story. But what I am interested is the way this road is being surveyed by someone from a distance, from a height, and that brings me to that important word in aesthetics, distancing. And in aesthetics, distancing is important. Even the concepts of rasa and dhwani, which are a part of Indian aesthetics, they involve this idea of distancing. And that is a very tricky concept, because you see, if there is over distancing, then maybe there will be apathy, or something like what do I call, incredulity. Yes. uh, or if there is under distancing, then maybe there will be some discomfort involved. So what is that right amount of distancing, if there is something like that? It is also interesting that poetry is also said to collapse distances, isn't that so? So I would just like to ask you something about your choice of the cover for this collection. What made you choose this photograph? Uh, and I would also like to ask you what goes into the making of a book cover, and how is it significant? Does it bring out a specific tone, that the work is putting forth, or do we have a distinct voice that we get a taste of through the cover page? So I would like to know from.
Well, I wish I could say that, given the Indian aesthetics and the idea of rasa and so on, and sound just like you, Shatarupa, but unfortunately, I am not as well read as you. So this actually, the cover is a photograph taken by a friend of mine, Vani Vemparala, who is herself from Hyderabad. And she's actually a professor of physics, theoretical physics. And she's also, in my opinion, a very skilled photographer and artist, but she regards herself as a scientist who happens to do this on the side. So I've used her covers, her illustrations, her doodles, as she calls them, but I think it's art, in my other books. And so I really wanted to use something from her for this book. So to send me some photographs, because I really felt that a doodle like her previous artworks wouldn't really work for this book. So she sent me photographs, and the minute I saw this, I was like, that's the photo. Why? I don't know. It was just the photo. And when you asked me in, you let me know what you were going to ask me in advance. Sorry about that, folks. This is not, it's not pre-rehearsed, but I did have a little inkling of what I was going to be asked. So I went, distancing. That never occurred to me, but that's really interesting. So first of all, I think when I think about it, the reason I chose it is because the centerpiece of this book is the Allahabadi Sonnets. And I lived, every day when I lived in Allahabad, I would walk from, if you know Allahabad, from police lines, I would walk into civil lines, and I worked in a school which was behind the bus stand on civil lines. So if you know Allahabad, that makes sense. If you don't, sorry. So either I would walk it, or if I could find a rickshawwala who would take me there, that was fine too. And sometimes I would take.
I've been to Prayagraj recently, so I have an inkling of what you are saying. Yes.
You know where I'm talking about. Brilliant, brilliant. And those lovely wide roads in that part of the city. And then when you go to the old part, it's so different. So around there, and one of the places I would cross quite often was the High Court, Allahabad High Court, which is still Allahabad High Court, I might point out. The name hasn't changed, which is interesting. But this actually reminded me of that, because especially from a South Indian perspective, you don't see roads like this. So I know it's Hyderabad, but for some reason, it reminded me of that. And also, in fact, in one of the Allahabadi sonnets in the book, there is a poem which draws on that idea of the balloon seller. And I had taught these boys, so the school was basically for children from various backgrounds. There were some Yadav kids, some Muslim kids, and it was a mixture of kids from who were living in that area. And it was pretty run down and a slum area. So two of those kids had been training as mechanics, and they were kind of rescued and they came to our school. But then I only was there for a year, and then when I left, years later, I returned. And as I was walking on civil lines, these boys came over to me, and I recognized them and they recognized me, and they were selling balloons. And so for me, that thing of these kids who had been training as mechanics, who had then gone to a school for a few years, and now they were selling balloons on the street, actually was the schooling. You know, there's all kinds of questions to be asked there, but the balloon again was central to that poem as well. So and I also used balloons when I was teaching maths quite a bit, this image of the balloon man selling balloons. So I suppose that's where that came from. The distancing thing, I lived in Allahabad, I lived in Chennai. It was only when I came back to Ireland and I had time to breathe in a way, that I started writing poetry. And then a lot of the poems started being about my lived experience in India. But when I was living in India, I wasn't writing about India. So I wonder, is there something in that idea of the experience was so intense at the time, it took me, 10 years after I'd lived in Allahabad to get back to write about it. And yet in the writing, it was as clear as if I had been there yesterday, for myself.
Yes, it's interesting that you mention it, Fiona, that you could write about India when you were away from India. Because you see, when you are away from a place, apart from the memories, you also have that longing. And I think that longing of, going back, or that longing of having the place here with you, that contributes to, what goes into our poetry. So, yes, that is an important aspect. And I can relate to your experiences in Allahabad because I was there for a short time, and I did see a child, a young girl, doing rope walking and with such finesse. And I didn't know whether to be happy about her talent or to be sad that she's doing this at such a young age when she should be going to school. I wanted to ask her mother. What I found interesting was that her mother was constantly walking beneath the rope, making sure that if something happens, then she would be there to save the girl. But that was not needed. She was such an expert, and I was mesmerized by her art. And that, I think, there is a reflection of that putting up a performance in your Allahabadi Sonnets as well. It is there, and I felt it. And when I actually went to Allahabad, I was thinking about your poetry, because at that time I was reading your poems, and they were there in my mind. Actually, your poems had given me some idea of what to expect there, and I was just relating those things when I went there. So yes, distancing is an important aspect, and which has a bearing on how we write, what we put in when we think of writing. Yes. So thank you for sharing it, Fiona. Now we will move on to a compound of words. And before saying anything, I would just like you to read the first poem in your collection, please.
Thank you. A compound of words. Try to atomize what you're looking at. Imagine each letter a string supplying a side way to transubstantiation, I'll start again. And I'll just let you all know what you're looking at is Irish slang in a way. It's what are you looking at? And generally, if somebody wants to threaten you on a street in Dublin, they'll kind of go, "What you looking at?" And then you either reply yes and you get into trouble, or you reply no or nothing or something, or whatever answer you give, it's going to cause trouble. So if you hear this phrase, you just run, or you kind of shape up or whatever. I'm trying to think. I think all the other words. Oh, those of you who don't speak Tamil may not know the phrase "arivangani," which means are you looking for a slap? And in Dublin, that translates as, "Are you cruising for a bruising?" A bruising as in a slap also. And I think other than that, you should get it. So here we go. Sorry. Try to atomize what you're looking at. Imagine each letter a string supplying a side way to transubstantiation, avoiding the black hole of a lemon market, the consonants shifting, the click of the Q Celtic fossils trickle down through the generations. Do you know it's all Maya, and we, Salah, must do penance? Arivangani, as you cruise for a bruise, crushed together, we make juice.
Thank you, Fiona, for that wonderful reading. And, crush together, we make juice. I mean, that sentence is linked to the idea of rasa. Because you see, I was reading the observations of Rabindranath Tagore on art. And in one of his lectures, he said that our emotions are like gastric juices. And they make the outer world, intimate enough. Those our emotions, which are like gastric juices, and the outer world has juices of its own, which in turn have an effect upon our insides, and that interaction of juices that creates rasa. And that is what he said is rasanubhuti, or the experience of rasa, of that emotion. So, it is there. This line itself links the whole concept of, how rasa is evoked in a poem. And that is what I want to talk about, how you have used such formal concepts in astronomy, in economics, in religion, and language families, and you have put all of them together. They somehow seep into each other, and then they reside alongside slangs like sala or adivangani, as you pointed out. So here, Fiona, I would like to ask you, what do you think about this space in between words? And I think that is important because your title is a compound of words. And if we just look at the word compound, it contains elements which together make something, yes, but there is always that distance between the two elements that make up a compound. So there is something in between those words which make the negotiation of meanings possible. So I would like to ask you about this in-betweenness, and what do you think of this concept as a poet? And also this is important because Homi Bhabha also talks about that third space, and this is related to a space, a liminal space in between cultures, which gives rise to something different, something new and unrecognizable, a new area of negotiation of meanings, as I was referring to. So, what does this in-betweenness mean to you?
Well, I think there's two things. There's the putting words from different places and different languages and different registers. So the poem was written in a workshop given by the British poet, the English poet, Jo Shapcott. She was also educated in Trinity, by the way, along with Gerard Manley, but a little bit closer to our time. She's a wonderful woman, wonderful poet, a wonderful workshop facilitator. So she asked us to make lists of our words related to economics, words related to business, words related to religion, words related to whatever, and then pick your own topic. And my topic was linguistics. And then the task was to make something with a selection of those words. And that's how the compound of words came about. But when it was written, I didn't know I was going to have the last line. It took a few days for the last line to come, and then the title took even longer to come. But I think there's something about putting things side by side, which don't normally go side by side, and they rub against each other. And of course, then you have sparks, you have friction, and that can be troublesome, but it can also be a source of energy. So you have these sparks and this energy and this new way of seeing things. The other thing is, like you said, almost keeping things slightly apart. So you have this almost magnetic energy. So a magnet exerts energy without ever touching. It pulls something towards it, or it pushes something away from it. So there's a kind of an energy, which, okay, it isn't sparks, but it's another form of energy. And I think in a way, a poem and how you place the words on a page, those white patches, that silence, in a way is high, or giving space for that energy to kind of manifest itself or to be there on the page. When you read a novel, you're not looking at a line at a time. You're looking at you're looking at a page of words. You're reading it through, and you're going and you're going and you're going until you get to the end. But when you read a poem, there's something about the placement. Even a prose poem, there's white on the page around it quite often, and that, I think, is very interesting. The placing. So if I put a word up right now, all of you would look at it and wonder, why has she put that word, and what does that word mean? And you'd have so many thoughts about it. Whereas if I write a whole page and I have that word in the middle of the page, you'll just read the word whatever way comes into your mind, and you'll just keep going. So I think poetry is about encouraging people to look again, and that the silence, the whiteness around that word, around the line, maybe encourages more focus and seeing, as you say, the gaps between. But there's also something about putting things which don't necessarily go together normally side by side and generating sparks. So I think it's the two, not quite touching and then rubbing off each other. I think the two kinds of things bring an energy.
Yes, you're right, Fiona, and that energy is, palpable in your work, because, we occupy spaces in between Liffey in Ireland and, let us say, Top Slip in Tamil Nadu, and there is Matancheri, there is Old Katra Allahabad, there is Kashmir, there is Karnataka. So, in your book, we do find ourselves in between these worlds and in between these cultures. And yes, those sparks are palpable, and those sparks work wonders. And I would at this point ask all our viewers to please order your copy of Fiona's book, A Compound of Words. We have shared with you the link, and you can access it. It's on the website of Yoda Press. So please do buy this book, and you will have a one-of-a-kind experience. I can tell you, I have read the book and I have felt all that was there to feel. So thank you.
If I can just say, Dog Ears Bookshop in Goa, they are amazing. They will parcel books and send them anywhere in the world. They're so obliging. And if you're in India, Dog Ears Bookshop, if you can avoid supporting multinationals and support the local, that would be absolutely amazing. Or even go into your local bookshop and see, can they order it in. But Dog Ears Bookshop is the place that I get quite a lot of my books from, and they'll even post to Ireland. So
that's important. Yes, Fiona. That we should support the local bookstores. They do need it, and they are wonderful in their own ways. Yes. So thank you. Now we will be talking about 3 poems of yours which I find really appealing, and they have been titled Rasika 1, Rasika 2, and Rasika 3. And I have always been intrigued by this idea of rasa, and which is said to be a kind of confluence of vibhavas, which are the cause of that emotion evoked. Then there are anubhavas, which are actually the effects of that emotion on our skins, our bodies. And then there are vyabhichari bhavas, which actually refer to the attendant states of that emotion evoked. So all of these put together, they bring out rasa, and then we experience that aesthetic pleasure which we, feel. So, I would like to ask you, what was your line of thought while writing these three poems? And you have linked them by, naming them Rasika 1, 2, and then 3. So if you would like, you can read them and then talk a little bit about your experience of writing each one of them. And I think our viewers will find it really interesting. Why Rasika?
Okay, so I'll start with Rasika 1, and then I'll read 2 and 3, and then we'll talk. Is that the plan? Yeah, great. So Rasika 1. There are words that stick between my teeth. Do they show when I smile? Phrases caught from others' languages, recipes from others' families, masalas made in others' kitchens. Can you smell them on my breath or as you enter my home? Do you want to see where I have written them in notebooks, marked them on jars? I whisper them in my daughter's ear, the essence of who we are. And Rasika 2. Her first taste of food, licked from a fingertip, then sucked, hot and sour and salt. Rasam. Her chubby body knows goodness, senses fresh to this world, already a Rasika. Rasika 3. Sitting on her bed, propped up with pillows, holding court, her women around her, explaining the scoring on Australian MasterChef. She wants the boy to win, his mother struggles so hard. On the balcony, puzzling over half-dead plants, rejoicing at a single jasmine bud about to bloom. At a concert, wearing sari, fingers looped around the raga, pulling the music around us, wrapping us in sound. Concoctor of pepper rasam. One moment, sorry. Concoctor of pepper rasam, maker of ven pungal, chakra pungal, pickle lady to some, feeder of friends, flood victims, all. Conjurer of connections, gatherer of friends, Rasika of life.
Thank you, Fiona. And it's really interesting, how you make that transition from words, in Rasika 1, which are powerful and also sometimes powerful because they are odious. And, those words which are always there around us, and what we do with those words. And then from that, you move on to the rasa in food, the rasa in and as the process. And then from there, you move into someone who becomes a rasika. And there is a weaving of all the senses there in that poem in Rasika 3. So just, I'm curious to know about your, writing these poems and what went into the making of these poems.
Well, I have to confess, my route to the word Rasika was through rasam. And I knew that rasam was this, it's the essence of whatever you're cooking. So it's the essence of parapu or dal. It's the essence of all of the spices you put in. So it's the essence of something. And then I would hear people who had the name Rasika. So I would be like, well, why would you call somebody after rasam? I mean, rasam's amazing. I love rasam, but like, would you call your daughter after rasam? So then it was explained to me that no, they were not called after rasam. They were called Rasika after rasa, which was this, and that's where rasam comes from. And then I began to understand the concept. So my route to these very high level aesthetic concepts was, as usual with me, through food. So I think I wrote the 3 poems separately and at different times. And then I was trying to figure, and I think at the time of writing, I think I had this word Rasika in my head, and this idea of somebody who seeks the very best, who knows the very best, who has this ability to discern what is just perfect. You know, I lived in Chennai for many years, and so I was exposed to all of the Carnatic music festivals, and you have all these Rasikas who go along and they sit and everybody knows the music, and this was good but not quite good enough, and that was better, and you know, so you learn a lot about, you know, people really are experts in their field, but you can also be an expert in other fields. So I think initially when I came back in the beginning, when I my house then had all of these things that I had brought from India, all of the spices, the smells. I would have rasam powder, which my sister-in-law would make for me. So all of this would be in my house. So my house almost had this kind of the smell of rasam, but also this sense of still being subcontinental. You know, it was still India, and you know, it didn't smell like a house of a white Irish woman, of mashed potatoes and bacon or whatever, you know, and cabbage. So it was this kind of an idea, I think, that got me going there. And then the second one is when my daughter, she was breastfed, and the first thing she tasted after Taipal, mother's milk, was rasam. And the person who gave her the rasam was this friend who appears in the third poem, Lakshmi. And literally, I can still remember she put her finger in her plate, and then my daughter, who was just walking, crawling, I think, came over and went, and it was just like, this was amazing. And the child's face, the baby's face, lit up with like, and I thought, wow, she's so small, she knows nothing about food, and yet she knows this is the best, and my friend makes the best rasam in the world. I will challenge anybody on any continent to beat Lakshmi's rasam. So so this baby knew this was the best rasam. So I thought, wow, she's so small, and yet she's an expert in this. And then the last one is this friend who lives life to the full and who experiences everything with such openness and an ability to kind of, you know, whether it's music or food or friendship or political activism, whatever it is, it's, you know, it's everything. It's all. And yeah, so for me, that's kind of where they came from, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's beautiful, Fiona, because you see, just as, you know, our sense perceives all these things that are around us, and they have a bearing on how we perceive the world, how we perceive others, how we perceive ourselves. So it is important, and the concept of rasa, though you didn't intend it, it you know, entered your writing through rasam. And yes, that is, it's true. I mean, food is basically you know, the most intimate thing we can ever experience, and it is so immediate to our experiences that you know, anything related to food, any writing related to food appeals in a different way, I would say. And that brings me to the next point, you know, I have, because you see, in your work, food and poetry are intrinsically related, whether we are talking of mangoes, whether we are talking of gulab jamun, whether we are talking of hira halwai, and you know, food is there, you know, almost uh, in most of the poems I have seen a reference to food and what it has made you feel at any point of time. So I would like you to talk a bit about you know, this connection that food has with immediacy, memory, and abundance, because this has a relation with the seduction of the poetic art too, in a way. And I would like to refer to the feeling I had when I was reading your poems, sitting in my room at the college. And I told you in our conversations that I felt as if days were stretching from my skin. I had that effect. I felt days stretching from my skin. I felt a pull on my skin, and I felt that, you know, the pull, in a way, was the pull of days. So, what kind of a feeling is this? If you try to look at it objectively, maybe you will understand nothing. But then that is what, the relationship uh, between food and poetry is, I believe, and it reflects beautifully in your poems. So at this point, I would like you to read Words to a New Wife Entering Her Kitchen, and maybe then we will talk a little bit about this, presence of food in your poetry.
Okay. So Words to a New Wife Entering Her Kitchen. The full title is actually Words to a New Wife Entering Her Kitchen for the First Time. And as you know, I'm sure, in some South Indian homes, for religious reasons, nobody who's from outside that particular community can enter the kitchen. So, if there's some particular communities have rules that somebody like me can't enter that kitchen because it's, so the kitchen in a lot of, I don't know, I won't say in all South Indian homes, but in many homes, and I think everywhere in the world, maybe, where we prepare food is almost a sacred space. But in some homes, it's actually considered so sacred that only certain people can even enter it. Not that we invite everybody into our kitchens anywhere in the world, but there's actual rules around that. So I suppose that made the whole kitchen thing to me, especially when I was barred from certain kitchens, it felt really, whoa, this kitchen, what's going on in that kitchen? So pack away your feelings neatly in spice jars. Carefully label each one clearly in black. Anger first you pack with chilies, red and hot. Manjal will fight off all sickness, even lust. Cloves, levang, take away pain, let go your hurt. Cinnamon, sweet spice of joy, leave friend love here. Jeera next reduces pain of birth, put away child love. With saffron, your baby can come fair or not at all, store control. Asafoetida, stinking spice, will hide shame. Black pepper, currency once, conceals your greed. So sweet taste helps digest disappointment. Happiness can be kept here. With menthia, fear of age, fear of life, bitterness will go unnoticed. Whatever heats your blood, ginger won't reveal it. Memories pack away with gussa gussa, forget. And when you finish scattering yourself around your kitchen, do not be surprised if you think like a cabbage. Dream of beetroot and aspire to be grain. You are now vegetable matter, no longer fruit. Only raw mangoes come in the kitchen. The ripe and juicy mambaram are eaten at first sight. It's so lovely to read to an audience where I don't need to translate every single kind of word and reference.
Yes,
what a raw mango is,
I
what
can,
a ripe mango.
yeah, and I can feel the spices working, they are all working around me. And so it's really interesting how you have related emotions to food and then to space, and also to people's perceptions of that space. So, maybe Fiona, you can just tell us what made you write this poem, and how do you use food in your poetry?
So this poem was actually one of the first poems in this collection to be written, and it was probably written sometime around 2010. So, and the collection didn't come out till 2019. So some of these poems are written way back, and some of the poems are written quite recently. This is probably one of the older poems. I read Chitra Divakaruni's book, The Mistress of Spices. And I read that years ago. I think I was living in Allahabad back in the 90s when I read it. And so that got me thinking about spices and what spices could do. And then there's a wonderful series of books. I think they're by T. Jayaraman or somebody, and he went all over India and he collected the names of all the different herbs and spices, and he tells you the name of the plant, the name in 10 different indigenous languages and in English, then all the different parts of the plant that can be used, how they can be used, what medicinal purposes they have, etc. So I had all of that, all the volumes of that, and I had this idea. And then I also knew that that you have your spice jars, and normally people will have them in steel jars or in some plastic jar, but there won't be any label on it and you never know what's inside it. But I have a relative who is so methodical. She writes the name on every single jar, and it's really neat and very the shelves in her kitchen are like military precision. And I was always really impressed by that. But I also thought about how to have the time to do that, it takes time and takes energy. And what are the things you're not doing in order to do that? And the ways in which some women are expected to give up work when they get married, or, work becomes so difficult, or life becomes limited, and your life becomes, sometimes marriage means a limiting and a shutting down of life for some people. And that limiting, it's almost like, what do you do with the huge person that you were? How do you pack that personality and those ambitions and desires into a kitchen? And the way you do that is to pack it into spice jars, I thought. And that was kind of where the idea came out of. And then which emotions and which parts of yourself would you pack into what? And then this notion of how grains are kind of closer to God, and people who eat root vegetables kind of are more limited. I think it's there is a kind of a thread of thought somewhere like that. So I was kind of interested in that as well. So I kind of played with that. So that's kind of where this came out of. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I would like to tell the viewers that there are many poems where Fiona has explored this relationship with food and emotion. And those poems are really appealing. They make you feel in a different way. And that is why you must read those poems. We are not going to spoil it for you. And you must read those poems and, taste the words in that sense. Yes. So now we'll go to the next point, Fiona. And that is something which is very essential in a poet, I think. And that is, the theme of courage. And if we look at courage, it can be personal because we reveal our vulnerabilities. It can be social because it means revealing society's vulnerabilities, and political, of course. And I have seen, a kind of courage coming out powerfully in your poems. If I may just read out some titles which really appealed to me, the poems which really touched me. A foreigner is someone who makes us feel we belong. That is towards the end of your collection. And, that is in a way pointing at a phase maybe when there is a trip back home, and along with it, so many thoughts, so many memories, so many feelings. Then the other poem, which reveals such a crack in society, is Sam Kundera Le Koti, which, as I said, talks very directly about child labor. And then the one which touched me was Ghazal for Asifa. And the way you put forth the meaning of the name Asifa, it was really beautiful. Someone who puts people together, someone who brings people together, and then, there is no Asifa here now. I think, those poems will make you look at courage at different levels. And I think this is important because, you see, many things are there within us, around us, which we feel it is better to brush them under the carpet. It is better to keep silent about them, because you see, pursuing truth and vision also entails sacrifices and losses. So, in this connection, I would like to ask you, Fiona, uh, what happens when a poet tries to hand over Satya Sutras? And I believe that is the title of one of your poems, a very powerful one. And I would like you to read it for us first, and then we will talk.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, it's great. I don't need to explain what Satya Sutra means here. Yeah. So this poem is in memory of Isai Priya and the many others who died in before and in Mulivaikal in northern Sri Lanka in 2009. Satya Sutra. It is in the details, put side by side by side, that we find the truth, the whole picture, sharp and clear. Each stitch tight and well angled, the needle pierces the fabric, sharp and well aimed. I know the truth of genocide is not in the numbers raped or murdered or displaced. Each swollen body is a stitch in the rough red fabric of the whole. The newsreader in her yellow sari, her image on the screen glowing, later reduced to grainy footage of a partially clothed corpse on the back of a garbage truck. The frightened faces of the children, forbidden to approach Amma's body. The plane will return to bomb the rescuers, the adults know. And there are those who will unstitch these knots, attempt to destroy the pattern, but look here, see the scraps of thread remaining, holes where once the stitches were.
This is so powerful, because you also talk about the attempts to, uh, you know, hide the facts, and the attempts to uh, put a gloss over those unbearable truths. But then you also emphasize that it cannot be done, it cannot be hidden, because where you want to take away those things, there will always be gaping holes, and people will see those holes and they will know that something has been done. So that is the power of poetry. And while I was reading this poem, I was reminded of Ilya Kaminsky, and what he says in the poem "We Lived Happily During the War." And I would just like to read two lines from that poem. We lived happily during the war, and when they bombed other people's houses, we protested, but not enough. We opposed them, but not enough. And that is, a poem from the collection Deaf Republic. And somehow Satya Sutra transported me to the world of Ukraine, and the unbearable suffering that is going on there. And then it took me to thinking about war in general, and how during a war, people's identities do not matter. They are just numbers, and whether it is counting the dead, or counting the number of living, those who have to be somehow sent to safe spots. So they are just reduced to numbers during war, which goes on and on and on. So I would just like you to reflect on this aspect. And at this point, let me also tell you, Fiona, that recently iFest organized a poetry reading session, which was based on war, and where iFest members, they voiced their concerns about what the war does to people, and why doesn't the war stop. And that is a major concern, and it is a matter of sadness. So I would just like to ask you, what are your thoughts about this, and if you just like to talk about it.
Yeah, I suppose I'm you talk about people are reduced to numbers, but I think what happens is people are reduced to a single identity. And I think it's a bit like, in another way, that the notion of the new wife, she's unable to have all the various aspects of her identity, this wanting to go out and dance and party, and maybe do have this ambition to succeed in this area or an ambition to succeed in that. All of that is reduced into small jars. And in a way, in this poem, it's something this beautiful woman, Isai Priya, who was on TV, sitting there wrapped in her sari, looking terribly elegant. And the next time she appeared on a screen was in footage which had been taken off the mobile phones of Sinhala soldiers who had filmed the bodies on the back of these garbage trucks. So I think whenever we find ourselves reducing any human being to a single identity, so when we cease to see another person as a member of this community, and a man or a woman or a trans person or a child, and somebody who loves poetry, and somebody who likes to eat rasam, and somebody who likes to dance bhangra, and whenever we stop doing that, whenever we flatten other people to a single identity, either we think, oh, I love all of the, I love that person because they're only this, or I hate that person because, I think that single identity is kind of scary. I wrote a terrible novel once, absolutely horrendous. It'll always stay in longhand in one of those, those notebooks that I think you can still buy them at this length. They're not A4, they're kind of a bit thinner. And it was called The One True Story. And it's the danger, and Chiamaka Adichie, that wonderful Nigerian writer, she has she also talks about that. I've gotten her name wrong. Chinamadozi. I apologize. But
Adichie.
Again, she has a pardon.
Yes, the first part is actually difficult to pronounce, but yes, Adichie.
Yeah, no, my mistake. Yeah, so she also had a YouTube thing a few years ago, the dangers of a single story. And I think this is one of the things. As individuals, we might not be able to stop wars, but we can keep telling ourselves that any time we see another human being reduced to one identity, there should be a warning sign. No, nobody is a single identity. All human beings are complex, multi-layered, with histories and futures and, all kinds of identities, whether it's just they like gulab jamun as well as, and there's always something they have in common with us, something that's different from us. But I think that's all we can do sometimes, is just to keep reminding ourselves and those people around us that there is no one who is a single identity. We are all so much more complex, and the other is also so much more complex, and just to keep thinking of that. And I think genocide is about that, the legal definition of genocide, which it was actually the person who came up with the notion of genocide was a guy called Raphael Lemkin, who was Jewish and who'd been educated in law in Lviv, which is actually in Ukraine now. It was actually part of Poland. When he was growing up there, but it's in Lviv, it's in Ukraine now. And that, he was growing up there, and when he came to be, he escaped, and his family were killed. But he escaped, and his contribution was to come up with this concept of genocide, this desire to wipe out the identity, the history, and in a way that notion of, taking the fabric and trying to remove all of the beautiful stitches. And all of us are stitches in various fabrics in different colors, and it's the variety which makes the world beautiful. And sometimes, people will try, but we have to resist that.
And Fiona, I remember in our conversations you mentioned a poem that you had written, in the slide. Would you like to read it out for us? Though it is not a part of a compound of words, still, because we are talking of war and identities and these things.
It's set in a particular region called Galicia. And I spent some time in a city called Sandomierz, which is like the southwestern tip of what was once Galicia. And Lvov was also in Galicia, and it had a population of Jews and Ukrainians and Poles and Russians, and it was a diverse population. And I'm just looking through this quickly to notice pączki are, again, I'm talking about food. It's a Polish word which literally means an envelope, but it's actually kind of like a donut with chocolate on top and jam in the middle, and it's doughy and it's absolutely delicious. The other word that might be useful to you is, well, you'll all know the word Maidan, so that will make sense. The other word, is pokój. And pokój in Polish can mean a room, but it can also mean peace. And spokojna is kind of to be peaceful, as far as I remember. So I think that should help. There's a few different people speaking, so I'll kind of indicate that. So telling secrets, 1. Sandomierz, a meeting of 2 rivers, a sangam. Bihava, home to Lehrmans, now forgotten. Only Ulica Kwiatkowska remains, and Lublin rhymes with Dublin. These places homed me for a year. I moved from Sangam, Sandomierz, to Sangam, Allahabad, and then to sea. I am at sea. 2. Morning coffee, always pączki, a doughy envelope, chocolate covered, inside a secret message of jam. So many secrets. In the shop, I could not buy what I could not name. Sandomierz. This is my Ukrainian friend, Halina, and I don't know where she is, Halina Ivaniets. So I'm hoping she and her family are safe wherever they are in Ukraine today. Sandomierz. She told me there was a graveyard beneath us. A rat coming up her toilet. Her grandmother's land had been taken by the Russians. Chernobyl had made so many unwell, but the wine and sausage she had brought back across the border were delicious. 4. Bihava, another woman. She'd been a communist, still had the Torah the neighbor had entrusted to her kept safely. 5. Lublin, Maidan, a word well traveled from Central Asia, south into India and north to the heart of Europe. A word carried in the mouths of many speakers of Polish and Russian and Yiddish and Ukrainian and German, worshippers in synagogues and churches and mosques, under rulers from Vienna and Istanbul, in a region named for the Celts, Galicia. I meet it in Maidanic, monuments of human ash. 6. Sandomierz. She told me about the daughter who had come to find her father's grave and found only playing pitches for the school beside the bus stand. She assured me that eating pickled cabbage cured cancer, her breast cancer. Bihava. She knew the paving stones of the park was tombstones, trampled beneath the feet of all who entered. 8. And there are many layers, like the onions and cabbages for sale in the marketplace in winter. In autumn, there were nuts and berries, but by deep winter, I am padded in layers, buying aging vegetables, dreams of freshness at their hearts, if you peel away the withered leaves. 9. Sandomierz. She told me they blamed it on the Russians, the digging up, the covering over. Her regular journey home on dark roads across borders made her Russian. She kept a cement block on the lid of the toilet. 10. Bhabha. The lintels of houses, part of a hand holding a lamp, Hebrew script above the heads of all who entered. My room, pokoi, was my place of peace. The staff room, a war zone for a woman who should be piękne, like a topless model in the photo. 12. Bhabha. Pani Podgorska has died. Where is the Torah now? And the knowledge of the secrets buried and erased. 13. I've been looking at old maps of Galicia, searching for for familiar places. Sandomierz, Bihava, Lublin, Lviv. The borders keep shifting, towns and cities move into and out of focus. I think of the Poramos, those swallowed by the appetites of hungry nations. Not even their bare bones remain. And Poramos is the Roma word, which literally means the great devouring. And so as the Jewish people named, the World War II, the Holocaust. So for the Roma people, some sections of the Roma community, it's referred to as the Poremos, the great devouring. Yeah.
That's a really touching poem, Fiona, and I really don't know what to say about it. I mean, it's best to be silent, I think. And when you talk of hungry nations, I mean, that is the idea that sticks to my mind. And what this hunger is going to do to all of us one day. I mean, I am compelled to wonder what will remain for others to be hungry for. I think that is the question people should ask themselves rather than going on and on with wars. I mean, these days it is just so unpredictable. We cannot say what is happening. I was really touched by a picture that I saw on social media of a young researcher in Ukraine, using books, stacked against the window glass so that it does not shatter. So, I always get tongue-tied, when these things they come into the discussion. So thank you for reading that touching poem. And now I would like to return to a compound of words, and I would like to talk about another poem which struck me, Chakra. And I think this poem is very important because whenever we think of the creative process, we think of creativity. It is also a cycle, a chakra, moving from ourselves towards and then back to ourselves. So, maybe you could read that poem, Fiona, for our viewers, and that is a really powerful poem, and then share with us a few ideas about the creative process and the cycle involved in it.
Again, by the way, the chakra, not that I've done huge amounts of study on chakra, it's more, I listened to a BBC documentary on Ashoka and I was amazed. And then I realized that a lot of the images I'd seen or whatever, in especially Allahabad, like that would have been kind of where Ashoka had a lot of power, and you would have had these, these pillars, and he would have had his chakra on them. So I suppose that's something that's in the poem. And this notion, I know he wasn't the nicest of men initially, but then he did become a Buddhist and a pacifist. So that notion of an India which is inclusive and respectful of difference. Chakra. Ashoka's wheel spins through history, stone-carved symbol, spinning wheel, cycle wheel. I feel freedom on two wheels. At speed, you can outrun the heat for a short time, but when you stop, she catches you and then revenge is hers. As I stand astride my cycle, enforcing the red light on impatient truck traffic, I hear the copper coin click of people leaves over the wayside altar, roadside temple, shrine to the hope of people that something may change. The trishul stands 3 lemons, sharp and bitter, pierced by its prongs. Lights turn green, I move off, keeping to the edge as trucks speed by, boy banging the side to scare pedestrians, dogs, cows, cyclists, motorbikes weave in and out, blue bottles never quite there when the vehicles close in. In this procession, we travel past the temple where side by side women will cook dal rice over wood fires, but that is January and it is July. We eat ven pungal and chakare pungal to remind us of the fresh village of the harvest festival, when we will be far away. No chance to sit before the temple, light our kindling and let the goodness overflow before the morning sun. The biryani of Eid has been cooked, shared and enjoyed, and we are celebrating the joy of rice and dal. My daughter discovers India's ancient kings, Muslim and Buddhist and Hindu, a past fast being buried by a saffron-bound vision of the future. This history not destined for school books, but burned in a pyre on which the living dissenter may also be burned. Kataripu Niram, a sari, the color of the flower of the aubergine plant. Katari Kaipuri, soft, spicy, sweet, as a cotton handloom podavai, in strands of wind, spun on a cycle wheel, woven into an afternoon sea breeze, floating on my skin.
Thank you. No, I just love this poem and the way you have crafted it. So maybe you could tell us a little about how you wrote it and what were the experiences that you put into it, and then it will automatically relate itself to the creative process. Yes.
So I was thinking about Ashoka's wheel, and then I thought about, as you know, the wheel, and then the cycle, the relevance of bicycles, and how I'd never seen a bicycle jam until I lived in Allahabad, and I went to old Katra market, and you couldn't walk down the street because there were so many bicycles, and there was a traffic jam, but it was all bicycles. So that was in the 90s. Things have changed, I know. Now it's all scooters and cars, but in those days. So I had a bicycle, and I would cycle along what is now like a 4-lane highway, East Coast Road. But in those days, they had just put in traffic lights. And so you would cycle from where I lived to, I did some work in a corporation school. So I would cycle along this highway. And I don't know why I was completely fearless, as we all are in our 20s. I don't know. It's something miraculous about being young. You just feel you'll be okay. And the trucks would be belting along and they'd go through the red lights, but I used to reach the red light before them, and I would stop in the middle of the road, and then all these trucks would have to stop behind me, and they'd all be yelling, and I would just go, no, I'm not moving. And they wouldn't knock me down, because I think they felt it might be too awkward to knock me down. They might have to fill out some papers or something. So there was a beautiful roadside temple, and you know the kind of temple I'm talking about. There'll be some small image, and it'll have kumkum and manjal, and there'll be little diyas made from cotton in little clay pots, and this beautiful peepal tree. And as you know, the peepal tree, when the leaves turn, they make a click click sound, and you would hear this. And all of it, it's like my route. You go from my house to this school, and all of these things you can see on that road, East Coast Road. So it was very much me back in that moment, taking that journey, and the adrenaline of being part of this procession, this mad traffic and motorbikes and people banging and the noise, and at the same time that sense of all of us together in this, and that unity. And then I thought about the temple processions and all of that, and how each community has its own different festivals. They move through the rhythms, but yet there's so much in common. It's all about celebration and food and sharing. When it's Pungal for one community, everybody gets Pungal. When it's Eid for another community, everybody gets biryani. So whatever it is, it's all about sharing and respect and understanding and how that isn't always present now. And yeah, and just hoping that it will remain.
Thank you, Fiona, for reading that poem. It has a different kind of power involved in it, and that brings me to the last part of our conversation. And our viewers, they are writers of poetry. They are poetry lovers. So I just wanted you to. Tell them, address them, and um, share some ideas about what they might come across on the road to getting published if they are writers, and how to keep putting words on the page. You are a facilitator. You call yourself, I know you like to call yourself a facilitator, and I know how wonderful you have been as a facilitator. So I would like you to share some ideas with our poets and poetry lovers.
Well, one thing I would definitely recommend is to read, to write, and to share. Well, that's three things. So I think that's the essence of it. Read as much as you can. If you can afford to buy poetry from independent bookshops, buy it from people like Yoda Press and other small poetry presses in India. Try to support them, because if you want to get published, they're the people that will publish you. And if we're not buying their books, then they won't be there when we want to get published. So that's the first thing. And then read as much as you can. If you can read, borrow from the library, whatever. Online also, there are some amazing websites where you can get access to really good poetry. Read what you love. Read what, makes your skin go prickly, makes you joyful. Read anything that will impact on you, that will as you were saying about Tagore's kind of idea, that will bring juice into your body and mix with your gastric juices and change who you are. So that's the kind of poetry I would say. Try and read, and then write whatever you have to write. And it does take courage. And it does sometimes, to approach those things that are kind of scary. But the thing is that if you write it, you can then edit. You can then decide, I don't want to share this publicly. I don't want to put this in the public space. And you can put it away, or you can throw it away. But if you don't write it, then you don't even know what's in there to come out. So in a lot of ways, free writing is a great thing. Or one woman I've met recently, her name is Elizabeth Ward. She's from the Irish Traveller community. She told me her family do freedom writing. And I thought, oh my God, that's a great name. So it's not free writing for her, it's freedom writing. So writing your way to freedom. And there is a lot to be said for that, writing as a way of becoming free as well. And then sharing with those whose work you respect, with your friends, and getting feedback, making little communities, groups where you might get together with other people who are interested in poetry. Maybe each one of you brings along a poem you really like. Maybe you sit and write at the same time together. Maybe you talk about the poems together. Maybe you bring your poem and people tell you what works for them in your poem. You read their poem, tell them what works for you in their poem. Generally, it's better if you can tell people what works in their poem than to criticize in a negative way. Generally saying to people, I love this and I love this, and this kind of confused me a little, rather than this poem isn't working, there's some problem here, you got to sort it out, So if we come with love to another person's poem and give that vibe, then hopefully we'll get that back from them also. And I think we can all learn more from each other in that way. And yeah, if you can do workshops, there are many free workshops online now. A lot of the British festivals actually, and the Irish festivals, have free workshops, free readings. And with Zoom, you can kind of do that. I know in India as well, there's lots of free workshops, free festivals. I know the Bangalore poetry festival that I was part of, that was free to attend. So there's a lot of these things are free, free, free. And if you're in the right area or you can, attending them is a great idea. And, you know, don't be afraid to approach poets you admire. I mean, Divya Victor didn't know me from a bar of soap, neither did David Morley. And I went to his workshop and I approached her. When I was a teenager, I wrote to Seamus Heaney and he wrote back. So, you know, if you find a poet out there who really sets your world on fire and you want to talk to them or ask them a question, approach them. Obviously, you know, there are certain ways and maybe they're busy and maybe they won't get back. But, you know, if you can be as respectful as you can of their time, a lot of people who write love to hear from people who are starting off writing and are willing to give a little bit of help as well. So, yeah. I hope all of you start or begin or continue writing and submit when you feel your poem is ready. Submit, 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 because nobody's going to come raid your house and steal the poems out of your drawer and publish them. When the time is ready, you're brave enough and ready, start sending them out and you will get no, 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 no. But you know what? You will get yeses as well. So you just kind of have to keep going. So good luck with it. And I'm looking forward to reading all of your wonderful work in the future.
Thank you so much, Fiona, for such sweet words and perceptive too. And, you know, write your way to freedom. That idea is something so wonderful. And I'm sure our viewers will begin writing and will not stop. And they will, catch that liveliness from you. And, it has been a great pleasure talking to you and learning from you and listening to your poems. And, we have had a wonderful journey so far. I always like to call conversations journeys because I have this feeling that we arrive, whenever we are in a conversation, we do arrive. And I'm not saying where, but I will just stop there. We do arrive. And thank you so much, Fiona. And we would love to have you again in some other program that IFEST organizes. You're always welcome because we believe that once you are at IFEST, you are also part of the family. So thank you. Thank you for doing this interview. And we wish you all the best. May you continue writing and may you keep putting words on page so that, people like us will read and will admire and will feel the power. And then, of course, we will also collaborate, as in we will also put in our words and then it will go on. So thank you. Thank you, Fiona. And I would also like to thank all our viewers who have been with us till the end and who have been listening to us. And I also thank IFEST for giving us this opportunity of getting together and talking about the one thing we love, and that is poetry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shatarupa, and thank you for inviting me. It's such an honor to be here today with you and to talk to you about poetry. Thank you so much.